Hey, welcome back everyone. This is Dr. Garen Weiberg. I'm a doctor of physical therapy, board certified sports specialist, and ACL specialist, and I got a good one for you today. So this is the 10 reasons for ACL re-tears and why those stats are just atrocious. If you watched my last video, then you know they're really bad, and if you haven't watched it, you probably should. All right, so let's jump into it. So reason number one, and these are in no particular order, would be prehab or pre-rehab, okay? So it makes sense that if you go into surgery better range of motion, better strength, less swelling, whatever, walking more normally, getting some basic movement patterns back, that you're going to come out of surgery better. Makes sense, right? There's a good amount of research that supports that as well. Also, it's a really good opportunity for some testing of the good leg, or I guess we shouldn't call it that, the non-surgical side, and which will be very, very important down the road when it comes to return to sport testing. So think about this, right? You want to capture the strength, power, size of the good leg right away, because fast forward 3-6 months down the road, and now that leg, both legs really, because you're doing less overall, are deconditioned overall. You're doing less. They're not as strong, or the good side isn't as strong as it was at the time of injury. So you want to capture that data so we have a better comparison down the road, because a lot of return to sport testing compares or will compare the surgical side to the non-surgical side. So the better data we have right now about the strength and the power of the good leg, the better it'll be for return to sport testing later. Prehab is also a great opportunity for education and goal setting and expectations about ACL rehab. You know, there's so much misinformation about ACL tears. Check Dr. Google, right? And then everybody is just comparing their situation to professional athletes. And we know that almost all professional athletes get back to sport, but as I said in my last video, only about 55% of young athletes actually get back to a competitive level of sport. So it's really helpful when the therapist and the family get to sit down and talk about things before surgery. Reason number two would be, once you get into rehab, would be just doing the basics well, and this is on the therapist. There's a lot of shiny object syndrome. Use this piece of equipment, try this cool new exercise on Instagram, but the reality is you got to do the basics really, really well. You got to get back full knee range of motion, walking normally, basic functional movement patterns like squatting and lunging. When you add weight to things too early, or you start doing too much too soon, the body's way to adapt or adjust for that would be to compensate. So you don't want to do too much too soon, or do the wrong exercises too soon and create these kind of compensation patterns that have to be kind of reworked and broken down later. So you got to do the basics really well and not skip over that, and a lot of that's on the therapist. Speaking of kind of therapists, it would be the lack of PT specialization. So you hear me say in the beginning of my videos that I'm a board certified sports specialist. That took me almost a year and a half after getting my doctorate to kind of specialize in sports and orthopedics, returning athletes to sport, learning everything about returning athletes back to sport better than they were before. And that's not an easy thing to do. And I'm not saying at all that other therapists, if they're not specialists, they can't do this. I would just want your kid to be in an environment with therapists who see ACL tears every day. They're in a strength and conditioning environment. They have a good control and understanding of strength and conditioning principles, which are really important in those later phases of rehab when you're programming strength and power exercises, plyometrics, agility, change of direction, reactive decision making, and then even some of these more nuanced emerging things in ACL rehab, like visual, cognitive, motor tasks, because we know that now plays a huge role in ACL rehab. So it just really takes somebody who is doing this day in and day out to understand these nuances, pick the right test assessments, know what they're doing, and have that expert decision making that's going to help your kid get back to sport and not re-tear and be a part of those atrocious statistics that I've already shared in my other video. Reason number 4 would be quad strength. And I'm gonna make a separate video about this one because it's so important. So quad strength is actually the best predictor of ACL re-tear, and it is the hardest return to sport test to pass. So we do all these cool return to sport tests, but isolated quad strength is actually the test that is least passed. Yeah, athletes fail that one the most. And we don't do a great job measuring it either. You know, for example, like the PT pushing down on the leg to test the thigh strength or test the quad strength, or you go into the surgeon's office, he pushes down the leg, oh yeah, it feels pretty good to me, right? Well, you know that's just not a good enough test, and that should make sense to you. You know, we're seeing quad weakness deficits for after 2 years after ACL rehab. So we're not doing a good job of getting the quad strength back for one, and measuring it to make sure it's truly symmetrical to the other side. Which kind of brings me to my 5th point, is just that ACL rehab is really, really hard. It just is. It's very difficult for both the therapist and the patient and the athlete. I mean, most people will probably agree with this. It's kind of easy to stay motivated with something for a couple or a few months, right? But try to stay motivated for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months even sometimes. It takes a lot of effort and consistency over time and patience. I mean, those are very, very difficult things to do in life. And I was just talking about quad strength, right? We are literally trying to grow muscle or add tissue to the body. That's a hard thing for anybody to do, let alone somebody to do at a deficit. And everything that goes into that, the day in and day out effort and consistency, nutrition and recovery, something that's not talked about enough in ACL rehab. These are very challenging things to do, and that's just the harsh reality of it. You really have to be motivated and have tools to stay motivated, which is what I'm working on. So number 6 would be poor return to sport testing. So it is easy to measure or objectify things like range of motion, strength sometimes if you have the right machines and knowledge and equipment, even things like landing mechanics or jumping and landing mechanics. But it's a lot more difficult to measure things like agility, change of direction, reactive agility in decision making. We know that the brain and visual system play a huge role in this, right? Think about this. Doing a test in a controlled environment like a clinic versus the demands of the actual sport, right? Being out in the field, looking 20 different ways at once, making decisions about where the ball is coming from, right? That is a huge load on the brain and visual system, and we see that athletes' mechanics break down when they're put under that stress. So we're just not doing a great job all the time with return to sport testing. Speaking of time, that kind of segues into my 7th point, which is just using time as a decision maker for return to sport. So get this, guys. There was this research article in 2018 by Berge, and she found out that 85% of therapists were using time to decide when their athlete was ready to go back to sport. So time along with other things, 85%. But this is what's scary, right? 42% of therapists were only using time as a decision-making point. So that's like, okay, you're at 7 months, you're good to go. I don't care what you look like or what you've been doing, but you're at 7 months, so you're allowed to go back to sport. How crazy is that? But this is happening every single day. It forced me to YouTube. It's making me make this video right now. This is literally happening all the time. So parents, I need you to understand that if your therapist or rehab team is just making decisions based on time, you need to get out of there. Okay, another nice segue. Look what I did here. All right, number 8 is returning to sport too early. So I know you don't like hearing it. Nobody likes hearing it, but it's just the truth. The stats, the research are kind of, they're not even arguable at this point. Re-injury rate is reduced by 51% for each month delayed until 9 months. So there's a 3 to 7 time increase in re-injury rate for those who returned before 9 months compared to those who delayed return to 9 months. So there's a lot of research on this right now. And we're just simply sending people back too early because, again, that's what Dr. Google said, or that's what professional athletes have done, or here's kind of a dirty little secret. Surgeons have to make money, right? And if they're the ones saying, well, actually, return to sports could be 9 months or more, and the surgeon down the street is saying 6 months, where do you think you guys are going to go? Probably to the surgeon that's saying he can get your kid back earlier. And I really caution you against that. All right, number 9, insurance and finances. As you can see, ACL rehab is a long process, and a lot of people end up exhausting their insurance visits and having to pay out of pocket. I know where I work, some people have a plan where they're only getting 20 visits for the whole year. That is very, very challenging to do ACL rehab with only 20 visits. So, a lot of people end up having to pay out of pocket, and that's just not possible for everyone. Maybe you are a parent or a coach who knows a little bit more about, the things I've already talked about, and you're driving a town or a county over to see a specialist, that takes a lot of time and energy from the family as well. Or maybe you're paying somebody like me online. We recognize this is a big limiting factor in ACL rehab, and I wish the insurance companies would recognize this and do better for you guys. So number 10 is speaking to those kind of non-modifiable or intrinsic risk factors, kind of the situation the athlete's in, or the cards that have been dealt for that athlete. So I want to compare 2 athletes here, okay? So think about a female soccer player who had a non-contact ACL tear. That means somebody didn't fall into their knee in a freak accident or something, but they were running down the field, they cut, pivoted, twisted, they tore their ACL. And then consider that maybe their mom had an ACL tear too, or somebody in their family, and that when we test their knee, their ligament, their ACL is a little looser. And that could be from the surgery, that could be from the rehab, it could be the graft type, but let's just say that graft's a little looser, okay? Let's compare that to, let's say, a male baseball player who had a contact mechanism injury. So let's say they play in the outfield, and that athlete and another athlete collided and he tore his ACL. He has no family history, so no genetic component, right? Mom or dad didn't tear. And when you test his knee, it's really solid. The ACL is not moving at all. Let's break this down a little bit. So we know that females tear their ACLs more than males. We know that female soccer and basketball are the highest sports with the highest incidence of ACL tears. We know that there's a genetic component. So I mentioned that maybe her mom tore, and that it was a non-contact mechanism injury. So what that means is it's something about the way she moves, right? Nobody fell into her knee. It's something about the way she moves. So we have to fix those mechanics or imbalances or whatever that might be. So all those things have to be accounted for, right? Compare that female soccer player to that male. Those are very different things. And I personally believe, and many researchers and other ACL experts believe, that those things have to be accounted for in the decision making when deciding to return an athlete to sport. Those athletes have to be treated differently, and maybe that female soccer player with all that other stuff going on should be held out a little longer. I hope that makes sense to you guys. So as you can see, there's a lot that goes into this. There's a lot at stake here, and unfortunately, we're just not doing a great job with ACL rehab, and there's a reason why the statistics are the way they are. The numbers don't lie, guys. So this has literally forced me to YouTube. I wanted to share this information with you. So please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment below. My email's in the description. I love this stuff. I love to chat about this stuff. Please email me. I'm trying to improve the statistics. I'm trying to do a better job with ACL rehab. All right, thank you very much for watching. Bye.